Another very disturbing ruling came down from the United States, United States Supreme Court today. This one regarding the separation of church and state. Kind of important because we don't live in a theocracy, right? Or we shouldn't. So this is from Common Dreams. I'll link it in the description box down below. By Andrea Germanos, the writer. Attacking the very foundation of church-state separation, SCOTUS delivers seismic shock ruling on religious schools. Douche. I guess maybe douche isn't the proper term, just horrible person. Maybe more politically correct. The U.S. Supreme Court on Tuesday delivered a ruling civil liberties advocates warn can make taxpayers, quote, underwrite religious education, opening a massive crack in the bedrock principle of church and state separation. Kind of important. I don't want my tax dollars underwriting any type of religious education because there's supposed to be a separation of church and fucking state. You Supreme Court fucking assholes. Jesus Christ. The decision in the case Espinoza v. Montana Department of Revenue was 5-4 with the court's conservatives in the majority. Not surprising there, obviously. As NBC News put it, the ruling, quote, further lowered the wall of separation between church and state and will likely affect laws or constitutional provisions in more than 2/3 of the nation that bar public funding for churches and religious schools. And what the fuck are those other 1/3 doing? Probably, in the Bible Belt in the South, if I had to guess. CNBC laid out the background. The case concerned a scholarship program enacted in Montana in 2015, which provided individuals and businesses with up to $150 in tax credits to match donations to private nonprofit scholarship organizations. Shortly after the program was enacted, the Montana Department of Revenue put in place a rule that barred scholarship recipients from using funds from the program to pay for religious schools. Makes complete and total sense. Again, separation of church and state. Taxpayers, the Department of Revenue should not be subsidizing religion in any way, shape, or form. Again, separation of church and state. The United States is not a theocracy. We do not need to be propping up any religious institutions through taxpayer dollars or otherwise. It's ridiculous. 3 mothers who sent their children to a Christian school, those goddamn Christians again, and relied upon the funds sued. The state Supreme Court struck down the program, prompting the High Court challenge. Quote, a state need not subsidize private education, but once a state decides to do so, it cannot disqualify some private schools solely because they're religious. Why Chief Justice John Roberts wrote for the majority. Yes, they could. John Roberts, you fucking idiot. Separation of church and state. That means taxpayer dollars. This tax credit thing in Montana should not be used to fund religious education. See, that's church and state should be separate. Even further, if I had a wider angle here, what he's allowing is this. They're tangled up. They're rolling over in the same bed. They're having sex with each other. The church and the state. We don't want that. Justice Stephen Breyer wrote in a dissent in which Justice Elena Kagan joined, quote, the majority's approach and its conclusion in this case, I fear, risk the kind of entanglement and conflict that the religion clauses are interpreted to prevent. Again, that entanglement, church and state potentially having sex now because of this ridiculous ruling by the Roberts Court and their conservative majority. Excuse me. Today's ruling is perverse. Justice Sonia Sotomayor said in a separate dissent. She wrote in part, without any need or power to do so, the court appears to require a state to reinstate a tax credit program that the Constitution did not demand in the first place. We once recognized that while the Free Exercise Clause clearly prohibits the use of state action to deny rights of free exercise to anyone, it has never meant that a majority could use the machinery of the state to practice its beliefs, which is what this ruling allows, as she points out. Today's court, by contrast, rejects the religion clause's balanced value in favor of a new theory of free exercise and it does so only by setting aside well-established judicial constraints. The decision drew outrage from the groups, including the American Federation of Teachers. He's kind of a hack liberal, the AFT president Weingarten, so I guess I'll read what he says. A seismic shock that threatens both public education and religious liberty, and called it a radical departure from our Constitution, American history, and our values. Never in more than 2 centuries of American history has the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment been wielded as a weapon to defund and dismantle public education, she said. It'll hurt both the 90% of students who attend neighborhood public schools by siphoning off needed funds, and in the long term, those who attend religious schools by curtailing their freedom with the accountability that comes with tax dollars. The court's narrow conservative majority joined with Trump Education Secretary and school choice proponent Betsy DeVos and other wealthy donors and special interests to attack public education and turn the First Amendment on its head, Weingarten added, warning that financial backers of this case will use it to open the floodgates to litigation across the country. According to Daniel March, director of the ASIO program on freedom of religion and belief, the ruling undermines the true religious freedom and is latest in a disturbing line of Supreme Court cases attacking the very foundation of separation of church and state. In the past, the court used to guard against sorry, just saw a notification on my phone for Instagram. I love garden post. In the past, the court used to guard against government-funded religion, he said. Today, the court has not only allowed, but actually required taxpayers to underwrite religious education. And again, that's hugely, hugely disgusting and disturbing. The United States government, again, church and state, as far apart as you can be. Now they're like this, jumping all over, having sex with each other. Sex is good. Sex is fun, but church and state should not be having sex. That's bad. We don't want that. We don't want that entanglement. Rachel Lazar, president and CEO of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, blasted the ruling, forcing taxpayers to pay for private religious education, as Montana's tax credit voucher does, is a fundamental violation of their religious freedom, she said. Another possible effect of the ruling, Lazar warned, is that public dollars will go towards amplifying discrimination. That is a very good point. More often than not, it's these religious institutions who are hugely racist, bigoted, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, etc., xenophobic. Too often, religious schools reject civil rights for women and LGBTQ people and promulgate religiously based interpretation of science, civics, and history. Lazar further accused 10 of the 12 religious schools in Montana's voucher program of having discriminatory policies, including permitting expulsions of students who identify as LGBTQ and refusing admission to students with disabilities. And then this is the taxpayer dollars, this voucher program, going to support discriminating against LGBTQ community, people with disabilities. That's fucking disgusting. Jesus Christ. Let's not forget that vouchers were first developed to evade integration orders and fund segregation academies, specifically designed to keep black and white students apart. She noted, warning that private school vouchers could worsen segregation in schools. And then, of course, the White House celebrated the ruling as a right-wing victory for so-called school choice and religious freedom. Again, hugely disgusting and disturbing on every level, and another really just horrible ruling by the wacko Supreme Court and their conservative majority. Peace. Much love.